Hello there, Shortcuts. This is Stephen here with the first of your 2 weekly videos. Your short, sharp inhalation of musical goodness from Shortcuts Records. This list, the price list will be published as always 9 p.m. sharp on Wednesday evening. That'll be the 20th of November. If you're not on the mailing list and you would like to be, drop me an email, shortcutsrecordsaus@gmail.com. This is the genre list. So we have soul and funk and soundtracks and blues, all sorts. I've chosen the same band to top and tail this week's genre list. And it's a band that I just absolutely love. This is a band who endured for decades, had absolute mastery of vocal harmonizing techniques, and fell just at the right time under the influence of an absolutely genius producer. And his name was Norman Whitfield. He was the guy who had a view that Motown could be more than just 2.5 minute radio kind of nuggets. And of course, they're amazing, don't get me wrong. But he decided that there was a place for storytelling, for cultural clemency, for cultural commentary, for something more. And he is a guy who did more for blending soul and psychedelic rock than just about anyone. And this legendary lineup of the Temptations from 1972 is one of my all-time favorite bands. So you talk Dennis Edwards, Eddie Kendricks on falsetto, Melvin Franklin, Otis Williams. Combined, this was just an evolutionary group. And, you know, they just moved the bar on contemporary Motown. And therefore, I love it. And this is the album. It's called All Directions by the Temptations. Look at that back sleeve. Now, there are some of you out there who know that we had a vinyl play night last Saturday night. And I played a song from this record. And the song that I chose was track 2 on side 1, which is called Run, Charlie, Run, which I think is maybe the key example of how this record broke boundaries. It drops more N-words than anything that you'll ever heard, bar some gangster rap. But it does it in a way that is both massively funky and engaging, but also very confronting about the reality of black men in America in the early 70s. The title, Run, Charlie, Run, probably tells you all you need to know. And on side 1, it's sandwiched between track 1, which is basically, it's called Funky Music Shown Off Turns Me On, which again, you know, it does what it says on the tin. But the track that everyone really remembers from this record is track 3 of side 1, which is the 12-minute, completely amazing version of Papa Was a Rolling Stone. Pulsing bass, little guitar arpeggios, the tension that is maintained in the percussion because it is so reserved. It's so innovative. And, you know, what is it, 52 years later, to me is absolutely timeless. And yeah, it's reason enough for this record to be in everyone's collection. Side 2 also includes a cover version of a song by one of the greatest Irish songwriters of all time, Earl McCall. Was he Irish? I may be wrong about that. But it's called, of course, The First Time Ever I Saw Your Face, which was also majestically covered by Roberta Flack. And the Temptations version is also wonderful. It's just brilliant, a brilliant album. And the one that I've got to finish the list is equally good, but totally different. And only 4 years later. So the quiz question is, what is that second Temptations album from 1976? Now I have a run of 3 soundtracks. Now, one of these soundtracks, in fact, any of the 2 out of the 3 could easily have been first, cab off the rank tonight. But I just love the Temptations too much. But look at this. This is the soundtrack to the 3rd Mad Max movie, Mad Max Beyond Thunderdome. It is an absolutely amazing quality gatefold in just wonderful condition. The Japanese first press, of course. It's just in great condition. Now, Mad Max Beyond Thunderdome really expanded the Mad Max universe. Really detailed. We all know about the apocalyptic vision. I know how incredible Fury Road was as well. And I still enjoy Furiosa, not quite as much as Fury Road. But Beyond Thunderdome, I remember as a kid just how teenagers, kids my age, just wanted to see that movie. It was great. And, the soundtrack is kind of interesting because it's dominated on side one by Tina Turner, who had, a pretty killer role in the movie, for those of you who know it, and delivered We Don't Need Another Hero, which was, I think, it's got to be the biggest hit of that year. I mean, it was number one it was number one for donkeys. But side two is really interesting because side two gives you a completely different take on the movie. And it is, probably one of the better contemporary soundtracks from that time. I particularly like Bartertown, which has, a pretty killer saxophone solo. And that type of incorporation of that type of instrumentation is really difficult in soundtracks. But Beyond Thunderdome, they completely nail it. Really, really interesting record. Okay, the second of 3 soundtracks, the soundtrack to Superman 3. I'm just going to take this out just to show you what's going on in that sleeve. Look at the kryptonite. There's Richard Pryor, who was the slapstick humor, which made this movie, somewhat controversial on its release. It was a very dark, from a Superman perspective, with the kind of doppelganger and the Superman on Superman fights and stuff, very, very dark. Pamela Stevenson and Robert Vaughn being a pretty fun, devilish duo. Margot Kidder, reprised her key role, but it's a kind of a weirdly toned movie, and that has impacted the soundtrack, I think, a little bit, in that it isn't John Williams, but it's Ken Grange, and he takes that really killer John Williams music, which is killer. And by the way, that riff is all the way through this, but introduces, with Giorgio Moroder and various other people, a little bit of electronica. And then there's tracks by Marshall Crenshaw, by Chaka Khan. It's very, 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 not Ken Grange, Ken Thorne, very interesting. For those of you who love soundtracks of the era, you will lap that up, and that is also a Japanese first press. Now, this could have been the lead-off, and it would have been, if I hadn't, I think I had this as the lead-off a few months back. I've got another copy of the Japanese first press of the Star Wars soundtrack. Now, if you cast your eyes back up the feed, you will see Star Wars and you'll get maybe a bit more information. But there's a big difference. between that copy and this copy. And that is this. This copy, I'm going to stand back to show you this in all its glory, has this. How cool is that? You're going to have to take my word for it. This poster is spectacular. It is the death, or the impending death, of the Death Star. Look at that. I love it. Amazingly, there were 2 copies in the box. Both of them had the poster. One of them is on my shelf. The other will not be on my shelf. I hope. I hope somebody loves this. Anyway, and what an amazing soundtrack too. It sounds so good. It's really surprisingly enjoyable. And, you know, you do end up replaying scenes in your mind. It's kind of bizarre. All right. Now I've got some Shortcuts royalty, true Shortcuts royalty, before kicking on to a section of blues. There is a compilation album that I think, I don't have the records to back this up. This is just my, pretty just, it has to be. This has to be the biggest record in the history of Shortcuts. It is the Shrine Cut, and I'll explain what that means, of the best of Otis Redding. He died way too young, as probably all of you know. You can see there that that is a tribute to Otis, 1941 to 1967. Is compilation of all of the best on a double album that also includes this. The best of Otis Redding, with lyrics and stories, the lyrics in English of all of the songs, and a really, really interesting, if you do the translation on this page, the opening page of the book, as you're listening to the tracks, the little stories about each of them are really moving and really beautiful. It is really well recorded. Just a great soundtrack, or great compilation. Genuinely wonderful. All right, I got 3 blues records, and then we got some soul and some funk, and then the mystery record to finish. All right, how about this? The Japanese first press in truly immaculate condition of Mike Bloomfield, Al Cooper, and Stephen Stills' Super Session. Maybe the most famous jam album of the 60s, certainly of the late 60s. Al Cooper was the organist in Bob Dylan's band. He played on Like a Rolling Stone. He played on Blonde on Blonde, so you've heard him play. Mike Bloomfield, killer guitarist, one of the greatest kind of white blues guitarists, and virtually unknown. And then Stephen Stills from Crosby, Stills, Nash and Young, and his own storied solo career. So come in for jam sessions. Side 1 is primarily Cooper and Bloomfield, and side 2 is Cooper and Stephen Stills. And boy, is it a game of 2 halves. The first half is somewhat incendiary, kind of unpredictable, very, very high technical ability, really listenable, time and time again. The Albert Shuffle on side 1 being a complete highlight. The second side is almost like what happens if you bring a classic songwriter in as well as a guitar player. So the second side is more structured. It has more tonality. It has a completely different guitar signature. Really, really different. I suspect most people favour side one. Certainly the people I know favour side one. We had a little review of this record in a record group a few weeks back that I'm part of. Some of you know who you are, and there was consensus on side A over side B. But I don't know. Well worth exploring, and this copy is absolutely beautiful condition. All right, T-Bone Walker. T-Bone Walker, one of the great guitarists, of which there is no doubt, and the composer of many standard blues songs that became staples through the 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s. Particularly call it Stormy Monday, but Tuesday is just as bad if you follow the rest of the lyric, which is, in this case, the opening track of side 2. Probably his most famous song. You will recognize it, for most of you who are any kind of blues heritage. But there are some other great tracks on here. You're My Best, Poker Hand, the T-Bone Shuffle, all wonderful. And this also is one of the highest selling records in the history of Shortcuts for a reason. This next one isn't, just because it's really hard to find, but that doesn't in any way negate just how great it is. I'm gonna crack open a myth though, and one that I've propagated as well. Earl Hooker was not John Lee Hooker's cousin. They were called his cousin. I'm pretty sure it was some kind of marketing kind of tweak. Born in Clarksdale, Mississippi. Although from what I remember about reading about him as part of a history of Chicago blues that I read a long time ago, he spent a lot of his childhood growing up in Chicago. And unlike, John Lee Hooker, he plays slide guitar. Now, slide guitar has a very specific tone, and it is really difficult to sing and play a slide guitar at the same time. But Earl Hooker did that. Really, a really pleasant voice he has too, but his slide guitar playing can be quite revelatory. And calling your record Two Bugs and a Roach should give you a sense of just how raw the sound is, in a really good way. Now, I think this was released in 1968, and within 2 years, Earl Hooker was gone, dead. Like a lot of those blues men, he didn't live a long life, and it's a real shame. I think he had more great records in him. This is his best, without question. And for blues fans out there, highly recommended. I've got a couple of soul records that I'm now going to bring you through. Another Shortcuts royalty is Caught Up by Millie Jackson, mostly because I think she's amazing, and therefore I've been pushing her agenda. Her follow-up to Caught Up was called Still Caught Up, and a lot of people favour this record, or at least think it's the equal of Caught Up. I'm not sure about that, mostly because Caught Up has that 8-minute behemoth genius song called The Rap, which still makes me laugh every time I listen to it, and also has one of the grooviest beats and just an amazing guitar sound. She maintained pretty much the same band and the same production style, so you get that real, the room is filled with master musicians feel. And she is more provocative, and she is not, middle of the road. She's a sexual provocateur without any doubt. And so I've played this to a few people, and they've been kind of turned off by that. I disagree fundamentally. I think it's great. But, as she says herself on the title track, or on the kickoff track of side 2, do what makes you satisfied. And, you know, she certainly does. If you've got Caught Up and you love it, you will also love this. There were 2 copies in the box, which means that maybe 2 of you might pick this up. Still Caught Up is great. This next record, I'm not familiar with. It's a white label promo of Marlena Shaw's Who Is This Bitch Anyway? An amazing cover. Look at that. So I played it. I played it earlier today. There she writes this. I'm going to leave you guys to explore it, but she writes this amazing kind of statement of intent right at the top of the record. Unlike Millie Jackson, and this record comes out a little bit later, this record is a little bit more produced, and you can really hear the melodic kind of undertones. She's not as raw, but I suspect that if you were looking at these categorizations properly, she's more soulful than Millie Jackson. As I mentioned, this is a white label promo. I found it very enjoyable, and I think whoever grabs it will too. Okay, we have one more to go before we reveal the second Temptations record. And this is also a record that I just grab every time I see it, because if you have any interest whatsoever in New Orleans soul, blues and funk, then Rock and Roll Gumbo by Professor Longhair just needs to be in your collection. This is a really fantastic first press on the Blue Star label. This is a record that is just basically a smile from start to finish. Rollicking, think of it as rollicking New Orleans style piano blues. You cannot go wrong. All right, now we started off with All Directions by the Temptations in 1972. And I am going to finish with this. The Wings of Love by the Temptations in 1976. This time, instrumentation, explosion. This is more, it's got more kind of really resonant soul ballads. It's just a different twist on the genius of the Temptations. I love it to bits. Marianne and China Doll are my 2 favorite songs, although Melissa really likes the kickoff, which is called Sweet Gypsy Jane. There you have it. Wings of Desire. The genre list for this week. Topped and tailed by the mighty Temptations. If anything caught your eye and you would like to be on the mailing list, the price list will go out 9 p.m. on Wednesday the 20th, Sydney time. Please like, subscribe, leave a comment. All this stuff actually does work. It's really important. And thank you so much for watching if you got this far. And the next list is a cracker as well. I better start preparing for it. Bye.